Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a fine day today. In this morning's video, we're going to talk about the Warlock. More specifically, some Warlock builds that I'm using, and kind of talk about a little bit about endgame DPS in a Warlock, as well as a little bit of endgame healing. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to talk about the DPS loadout that I have here. Um, this DPS loadout is capable of competing with some of the big dogs on the server for endgame DPS, especially as you start getting the stats up. The current state of this Warlock, I'm probably going to run middling high with my DPS. Maybe not necessarily take first place, but in most parties, I'm going to be right up there. So when I talk about it from a gear perspective, I'm going after gear that's primarily giving me a, a damage bonus, right, for my range damage. So, for example, the Hags Rags right here are giving me 3% more damage to my ranged powers. In right now, current state mod 16, most of this percent damage gain gear is the best in slot gear for your DPS classes. That is definitely not the case, though, if you're going to switch over to a healer loadout. If you're running a healer loadout, you're going to be chasing power. Another call out here uh, for the Warlock. This particular Warlock build absolutely depends on running the Lost Moth set. Um, the Lost Moth set, for those not familiar, you do an additional hit for weapon damage on a critical hit. The Warlock has a lot of powers that do direct damage ticks, two specifically, and it's got a pretty fast attack. So, a good Warlock in combat is hitting an average of up to 5 times per second, right? And at 50% crits, you know, basically that's 2.5, potential crits per second that you're proccing the Lost Moth set. That can be pretty big. And I've actually seen that in action in Lair of the Mad Mage, especially in trash mob scenarios, where warlocks can start putting on some pretty big damage numbers in dungeon. The other big call out is, like this particular warlock has crash guards on. It really probably should have the primal again for some action point gain. If you look at the shirt and pants, so I'm running, for example, on the shirt. Whenever I critically strike, my encounter power cooldowns are reduced. Right, I have a 10% chance to reduce my encounter power cooldowns, and I have AP gain through the same kind of mechanic on my pants. That's a pretty big thing to have. The other thing, you're going to want to run probably a different artifact than this. You're going to want to, like, say, run the Tales of Old artifact, or maybe a Soulsight Crystal when you're up for single target damage, um, stuff like that. I'm not going to get too much into mounts insignias. As a DPS, your stats really should be capping, armor pen, and accuracy. Those are your two most important stats for any DPS character. You're going to want to run more combat advantage than I'm running here. You're going to want to be crit capped. Crit capped is absolutely vital with the Lost Moth set. That shouldn't be too hard. Most people, you're going to be able to crit cap naturally with gear without even trying. You're not going to have to put any crit into anything. For most people. And the other thing is building up your power. Obviously, power, bigger hits. From a weapon enchantment perspective, I haven't mentioned this in any of my other videos, but for non-scaled content, Vorpal is king. Vorpal is, based on my testing, the best weapon enchantment in the game right now for non-scaled content. Meaning, if you are not being scaled down below level 80, the Vorpal is a great weapon enchantment to have. Uh, when you are in scaled content, some of the other weapon enchantments give Vorpal a run for its money and are probably a little bit better. When we're talking about armor enchantments, I am definitely not running best in slot armor enchantment on this one. I'm running a Shadowclad. Um, the Bark Shield, the Shadowclad's okay. Um, But I actually think either the Bark Shield, the Elven Battle, or the Eclipse enchantment are probably the armor enchantments you want to go with. That being said, with some of the changes in the armor enchantments with Mod 16, they're not quite as important as they used to be. And I think there are some really fun alternatives to those armor enchantments. For example, the Thunderhead looks really, really cool, like say on a wizard, right? When it comes to companions, you really want to get your bonding runestones obviously up as high as possible. These are I'm only sitting on 14s right now. I haven't upgraded these to 15 yet. I'll probably do that, sometime in the next couple of days. If you have the resources to upgrade, uh, absolutely upgrade those resources. Stack power on your companion equipment. Make sure that as you're leveling under mountain and you're going through those expeditions, that you are soloing those expeditions and collecting all the magic runic pieces so that you're getting the best possible turn-in result. So if you collect all of the runic magics or I forget what exactly they're called, you collect all of those through those leveling expeditions. And then you turn in your quest. Two of those quests will give you purple drops. Uh, that being said, these companion power slots, you're going to want to just fill your stats in. You can see like I'm running Tiger's Instincts here still. It's probably not the best one to run anymore, right? Stack power in here when you can. Fill in stats that you may be short on. And there's a couple other cool bonuses that really go in here. Also running an Augment Companion. It just boosts my stats. It's a lot easier to balance stats. I found though running solo that having a summon companion and getting that combat advantage, working with your summon companion for combat advantage actually can be a pretty big damage boost solo. But now with the enchantment changes this last week with the patch, that's not anywhere close to as big a deal for lower power characters. You're getting so much more stats that most of the solo content's pretty trivial now, right? When we come to boons, uh, in the campaign boons, right up the tree, power and hit points. I do that for both the healer side and the DPS side. And then I pretty much always go for the marathon runner feat. Again, it's as a DPS or even a healer or a tank, it's really important to stay with your group. Most people are taking this. Most people are running a Gladiator's Guile, their mount insignia now bonus. Um, and with the slowdown of characters, the movement speed being slowed down so dramatically with the loss of movement in this new mod, it really helps speed things up. Uh, the other one I've been taking on this one again because this is more of a ranged character, and Blades doesn't get interrupted that easily as I go with Companion Influence for a few more stats. Another really viable alternative to this particular, the simple support, is the Disenchanting Aura, where you're getting a little bit more control resistance. That can really help limit some of the interrupts and keep you kind of moving fluid. For throwaway stats, then down in these bottom tiers, I generally never go with any of these other pieces. And if you look at it, increase your crit strike by 250 per rank. I mean, you put all 5 points in that, and you're basically gaining 1% crit. And if you're already over crit cap, even if you're under crit cap, it's such a low amount. You can slot in, an Azure enchantment at like I think rank 10 and get basically the same benefit out of it. It's kind of a waste from a boon perspective. So I kind of go in then with the damage increase and decreases. I always start with the cultists and the um, undead. It seems like in this game there's more cultists and undead than there are any other types of enemies. Then I start filling in demons and then dinosaurs. Obviously, if you're focused on Chult, you're probably going to go dinosaurs than demons, but that's kind of the way I went. You look at tier 2, go for action point gain and increased recovery speed. Quicker cooldowns, pretty important for this build. You're going to go this. I mean, these are kind of the cookie cutter boon choices that most people are going to make for most of their builds. there's very little reason to diversify down on these bottom 5 tiers. When you come up to the Master Boon tier, that's where it gets a little different between, say, a healer or a tank or a DPS, right? DPS is probably going to take Deathly Rage every time. I take Deathly Rage for all my DPS. Um, when we're looking at the Soulbinder build, we go for Bless Advantage instead, just really about charging up our heals. So from a power perspective, again, this is a Lost Moth uh, encounter cooldown based build, right? So this build's all about doing as many damage ticks as possible, proccing lots of Lost Moth, and churning through trash like a lawnmower. So from an at-will perspective, we look at Hellish Rebuke. So this is going to be our go-to at-will. You're going to use this all the time. This is going to be your in-between. You're just going to be bam, 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 right? Building up soul sparks and then keeping your soul sparks full. Dark Spiral Charge hits really, really hard once you get 3 stacks on it. For an at will, again, magnitude 210 at will at the top end. Don't use that unless you've got all 3 spirals around you. So this is kind of almost treat it like a encounter power, right? When we come to our encounter powers themselves, I generally lead off with Hellfire Ring. So I come in, I pop down my Hellfire Ring. I'm right away now. I'm putting down dots, and having a relative good time of it. Then I pop Blades of the Vanquished Army. Um, the blade magnitudes themselves aren't fantastic, but they do a lot of hits. They hit a lot of enemies. Does a lot of Lost Moth procs. This is a great encounter power for proccing the Lost Moth set. And then finally, I typically run Killing Flames. Although, if you're going after maximized Lost Moth procs, you probably would want to run Dread Theft. I don't run Dread Theft too often because it's kind of finicky and can be a pain to aim and hit as many targets as possible. But all of the damage ticks from Dread Theft will also proc Lost Moth. However, I prefer Killing Flames. Again, it kind of becomes my coup de grace. And also, it will assist in proccing Soul Investiture. From a daily perspective, my go-to daily for trash is always Tyrannical Curse. And then my go-to daily for single targets is Brood of Hadar. Brood of Hadar has obviously a good initial hit. It's not terribly fantastic, but it's pretty good. But it also has damage ticks that are eligible to, again, proc Lost Moth. When we look at the class features, from a DPS perspective, No Pity, No Mercy doesn't leave my bar at all. It's great for generating soul sparks, and obviously it's granting me combat advantage. It's great when I'm single target. And then I run Dust to Dust, which increases my damage dealt by 5%. From a feat perspective, this is where I may differ from some other Warlocks on the server, but again, this is working really well for me with the Lost Moth set. So I kind of treat the first one as kind of a throwaway. I should probably change this to the Power of 9 Hells, more Soul Spark generation. But I'm going to be honest, I never use Soul Scorch. The reason I don't use Soul Scorch is my Soul Sparks, if you look at this, when you have Soul Sparks, they're granting you increased damage. So they're increasing your damage for everything else. You use Soul Scorch, you're expending Soul Sparks. And those Soul Sparks are then reducing the rest of your damage because you just spent them. And Soul Scorch, to be honest, doesn't hit very hard. It's got a slow cast time. It's really, all in all, it feels kind of a wasted mechanic to me, and I really wish that the devs would have done something about the Soul Scorch tab mechanic on the Warlock. For column 2, I take Warlock's Curse, so you deal 10% more damage to targets affected with Lesser Curse. For column 3, I take a Soul Desecration. Now, this is one of the separators for me and some other people. I like having my Soul Puppet out all the time. The Soul Puppet by itself does very little damage, but I want it out all the time. I want it actively engaged in combat, and we'll get to that in a minute. For this one, I go with the dealing 20% more damage, up to 20% more damage as your target's health diminishes. Up until this last week, I haven't tested it since they've supposedly fixed some of the creeping death issues. But this is really great for kind of finishing off, your enemies. The big thing with this is with the Lost Moth set, remember, instead of the Demogorgon set, you're gaining that damage as basically your target's health diminishes, as long as you're staying healed up, right? Because it's all about your hit point difference, percentage difference. Creeping Death, honestly, it felt really slow. In previous tests, it was adding a very little amount of damage. It really wasn't a worthwhile feat. Again, that may have changed. I can come back to that at some other time. And then Wrathful Souls. So this is part of the reason why I want my Soul Puppet out all the time, right? So when my Soul Puppet attacks, my encounter cooldowns are reduced by half a second. So again, it's really about faster encounters, faster dailies, lots of damage ticks to proc Lost Moth, and churning through trash. And honestly, even doing it that way, it does pretty decent damage on single targets. If you want something burstier, you probably got to go with some different encounter powers. But for the majority of things, this will work fantastically for you. I'm going to switch over quick here to the Soulbinder build. So this is a healer build. I haven't tested a lot of this. I was just doing some rework on it yesterday. But from a really simple perspective, you want to be building up soul sparks so that you can keep your heals up all the time. I'll talk stats here in a second with the Warlock, but I'm running, Essence Defiler is kind of my go-to at will, and then I've got some Soul Reconstruction in there as well. And then from an encounter perspective, I'm running Vampiric Embrace, Warlock's Bargain, and Harrow Storm. So my goal here is to, use Warlock's Bargain as needed early on. Use Harrow Storm all the time. I want Harrow Storm down all the time. And then I'm going to use Vampiric Embrace on occasion to get me some temporary hit points. And then from a daily perspective, I generally run some Soul Pact, and then occasionally Immolation Spirits. From a class feature perspective, I go with Dark One's Blessing. So again, it's about generating soul sparks. And then I do Borrowed Time. So each soul spark used in a power will heal you for 1% of your maximum hit points. So as I'm doing heals and expending soul sparks, I'm also getting healed. From a class feat perspective, I'm running Essence of Power, Transfusion Tactics, Lingering Sustain, Thief of Life, and Spark Energy. So the Warlock, like all the other healers, has some very important stats. So you can see I've kind of got the wrong gear in here right now. I'm in the middle of reconfiguring some of the gear on the Soul Weaver side of this, the healer side of it. Stats that are not important as a healer: Armor Pen, Accuracy, Combat Advantage. You could put those to 0, if you can get them down to 0, and you could still be a super effective healer. The important stats are going to be Power, Crit Strike, because your heals can crit, and then obviously Crit Severity, and then Outgoing Healing. So you can see that right now my outgoing healing on this healer build is 2.8%. you want to get that to at least 20% or higher. So when we talk about companion slots, there are companions in here. You could slot power. The best companion slot power for power is 8,000 power, and there aren't many of them. But there are, maybe 3 or 4 companions that will max out at 10% outgoing healing. And if you think about it, 1,000 power is essentially 1% increased outgoing healing. It's roughly equivalent. So from a healer perspective, that 10% outgoing healing easily trumps adding power in those slots. So again, you could, if you take this outgoing healing up to, like say 40 or 50%, there are a number of really good healers out there running around with around 50% outgoing healing or better. You don't even need to worry about what gear you've got slotted. You can completely forget about it and just do whatever you want, right? So again, from a healer perspective, power, outgoing healing, crit, and crit strike. If you've found any of this information useful, helpful, or you have any feedback, critiques, please hit me up on my Twitch. That's Twitch TV /Lord_Willow_. And thank you for your time.